Welcome to Marketing Management, Chapter 2. So, today we're going to talk about, looking more at the corporate side of marketing. So, typically in an organization, you have to think about the brand of the organization, or what we typically will call corporate communications, and then the brand of the individual products or services that a company might put out there. And often, an individual company will have a manager for each of their brands, or it depends on how the organization is set up. And we're going to talk about that later on. But the organization may be set up whereby each product has a marketing manager, or it might be that groups of products have marketing managers, or it might be that the entire organization has one marketing manager. It all depends on how the organization is set up. But the idea here is that organizations typically separate the leader brand or the organizational brand from individual products within the organization. So Johnson and Johnson has a brand, and then they make different types of products: powder, Pampers, etc., etc. So we're going to be looking at, primarily in this chapter, the marketing surrounding the organization as a whole. So the first case study that we talk about here is Disney. Now, Disney is an incredible brand, right? Disney runs the gamut in terms of entertainment. They have sporting brands within their portfolio. They have radio stations, music, TV. Then they have the all of the parks. So they even own Star Wars and the Marvel movies now. So Disney has an incredible portfolio. The question at one point in time was, is it too much? Can they maintain the brand? Because, of course, when you are a company like Disney, you stand for wholesome, family oriented. And when you start to have mission creep, or the expansion of your brand in this manner, it's hard to keep track of all these things. It's hard to make sure that everything ties in with your mission, who you are about, what you're about. And so sometimes some companies decide that in order to keep their reputation streamlined, in order to be only involved in the things that they feel they need to be involved in, they keep their portfolio small. But at the end of the day, each company has to make this decision based on what is best for them and what is best for their customers. There isn't any, one set of rules that we can go by and say this is perfect for everyone. But we do know that whenever an organization is deciding whether or not to go into a new field, they have to think about, does this field make sense for who they are as an organization, who their customers typically are, and what their stakeholders and shareholders will expect of them. Okay, so moving on now. When we think of organizations and how they're going to fare with their mission and their vision, we often have to think about strategic planning. So, strategic planning is something every single organization has to consider. And strategic planning, when I think of strategic planning, I think of three things. So, let me just talk to you guys about what those three things are. So, first is a company has to know what their resources are. So, their resources have to be very clear. A company also has to know and be aware of what their capabilities are. Right? And then the last thing that the company has to think about as they're thinking about strategic planning is what the market is calling for. And often companies that do well consider all of these, right? So resources, capabilities, market. Now, why is that important? Why do we care about these things? Why do we even need to know about these things? Well, first of all, companies often do strategic planning and they think about where they want to be or what the market is calling for them to do. But they don't have the money to do it. So how are you going to, the market is calling for you. Let's say you are a tow truck company and the market really calls for you to have a fleet of 20 tow trucks to compete. You have two. Where are you getting money from for the other 18? Is that practical for who you are, what you want to be, who your customers are, etc., etc., etc.? So you can't just take one. Or let's go another route. Let's say your capabilities. You have money, but you don't have staff. So you're a small company with enough cash for what it is you're trying to do, but you want to take on a venture that requires you to upscale by 200%. Does that make sense for who you are and what you're trying to accomplish? So it's very important for organizations when they are doing strategic planning to really get a sense of what your resources are, um, what your capabilities are, and then where's the market taking you? You know, what is it you want to accomplish? So I think that's a big thing for me that a lot of organizations don't really think about it. I guess the fourth one would be the goals piece. So what are your goals given your resources and your capabilities and given what the market is asking for you to do? So when we are doing the strategic planning, two things that are always going to come up. Well, three things: mission, vision, portfolio revision. And what does that mean? It means, okay, so we know that these are the things that the market is calling for. What is it that we want to accomplish given what the market is calling for? Because the market may be calling for all kinds of things and we can't do everything that the market is calling for. But there are some things that we will be able to do and some things we will be able to do well. So then we have to really say to ourselves, okay, so how are we going to find, we know what we do well. How are we going to define our portfolio? How are we going to get a portfolio that matches what the market is calling for us? And then are there any other things? Are there any other things that we have to do to get us there? So do we have to hire more people? Do we have to downsize? Do we have to get more cash? Do we have to be much clearer on where it is we want to go and what it is we want to do? Or do we just simply have to listen to what the market is telling us and work accordingly? All of these things you have to think about in strategic planning. And you know, a company has to have a strong mission and a strong vision. And when you're talking about a mission, here are the things that you really have to consider. What is our business? At the core, what is it that we do? Who are our customers? What is it that they value? And where ideally should we be heading? You don't want to be too broad, but you don't want to be too narrow. You want to find that sweet spot down the middle. And for me, I always say your mission has to be three things. It has to speak to your customers. It has to speak to your employees. And it really has to be visionary, meaning this is what you want to do. This is who you want to be at your best, right? Good. So within that strategic planning, in addition to the mission and the vision, remember the last piece I said, you have to get your portfolio. So in this process, you have to think about, well, what are we currently offering in our portfolio and where do we want to be? Does it mean if we're not where we want to be, how are we going to revise? What's the criteria we're going to use for revision? So the Boston Consulting Group came up with this BCG matrix a while back. And it really talks about market growth versus relative market share. It's a matrix that was designed to help companies as they look at what they currently have and are offering versus where they want to be. And then they can figure out what they're gonna dump, what they're gonna keep, etc., etc. So if you look at, we started off as a dog, and the dog means that you have low market share and you're not really growing. So things are pretty brown, pretty bad, right? Now, the thing is that a dog can be at the beginning of your stage or it can be at the end. What do I mean? Let's say I introduce a new product to market. Well, just as I introduce this product to market, it doesn't have a lot of market share. And maybe just as I introduce it, it's not really growing very fast. So that can be a dog. Our hope is even if we introduce a product at dog, it will quickly move to question mark. Of course, we would love for everything we introduce to be at question mark, where, you know, it doesn't have a lot of market share, but it's growing rapidly. But we, even if it's a dog, we hope that it will evolve into a question mark. So the question mark, it doesn't have a lot of market share, it's growing rapidly, and so we hope it then moves into a star where it's moving fast, but it still has acquired a significant amount of market share. Things can't keep at the star status for forever, so eventually stars are going to slow down. So their rate of growth is going to decrease, and then they might become a cash cow. It is our hope that they will stay as cash cows for a while, but we don't know. What we don't want is a cash cow to eventually become a dog. I mean, some companies, this is inevitable, but some companies are able to maintain it and stay it off. So, what are some examples? Well, I think certainly right now, Netflix is a star, right? Netflix, I mean, especially in these COVID times, is growing at an alarming rate. I think their share price is up significantly. They've increased subscriptions by 200 or 300% in 2020, just between, of course, February and May, obviously because of coronavirus. But even before that, they had been a star. It might be by the end of this year, because of the amount of people that would have taken on subscriptions, they might turn into a cash cow because their growth cannot be sustained at that rate, obviously. What else? What else can I see? Zoom might be a question mark. Maybe they're growing pretty fast. And or maybe they might be a star. Maybe they're growing pretty fast and they have a big market share. Before that, WebEx and Skype. Skype now. I mean, when last you heard about Skype? I have Skype for if any of you all want to get in touch with me, but who's really using Skype, right? So someone might say Skype right now is a question mark. Or maybe it's a dog. Who knows? It's definitely not a cash cow. So, you have to think of different products that might fall in different categories. And then as a company, you have to decide, well, how many dogs do I have? How many cash cows do I have? If you're Apple, you have to think what is what? What do you want to stick with? What do you maybe want to get rid of? The home pod. I mean, who has a home pod? It's running at $350 a pop versus um, Google Home, I think, is $50 device, and Amazon Alexa is like $29.99. So really and truly, who is buying a $350 HomePod from Apple, right? I would say that is solidly in the door category. So once you identify what is going to be in which category, then BCG, the Boston Consulting Group, has recommended, well, certain things you're going to build, certain things you're going to hold, certain things you're going to harvest, certain things you're going to divest. So, for example, if something is a dog, you got to get rid of it, you got to divest. If something is a cash cow, then you want to take full advantage of that. Invest in it, milk it, make it as profitable as possible, find new markets that might be excited about it, etc., etc. What is a hold? Things that maybe a cash cow might also be good for a hold, where you're really trying to hold on to it at that level and preserve market share. Question marks, you want to build. You want your question marks to turn into stars, right? So there are different strategies depending on where you are in the grid. Now, also, there are different strategies depending on what you want to accomplish. Are you going into a new market with a new product? Are you going into a new market with an existing product? So they're all different categories: existing product, existing market. So this means, I like to say this is the Apple sweet spot. When you think of it, Apple wants everyone to buy more Apple products. That's how they operate, right? So Apple does existing products, existing markets, but they also do new products, existing markets. Because who do you think they're selling the iWatch to? Think they're selling it to people who own a Samsung? No, they're selling it to Apple consumers who already have an iPhone. So who is going to buy that ridiculous $350 HomePod? Apple consumers. Who it is that typically is going to buy an iPhone? Oh, no, if I have an iPhone already, what is the computer I'm probably going to want to buy? A Mac computer. So Apple really tries to get you all with the iLife, right? That is what they are about. They are about making sure that any new product that comes out is for their existing market and to get more of their existing products consumed by their existing market. So that's Apple's strategy all day long and twice on Sunday. Then you have existing products that want to go after a new market. So you're like, what is that? Well, what if a good example is the not app. I'm into Apple now. There is a product called Ensure. Now, Ensure used to be a nutritional drink that they sold primarily to geriatrics patients in hospitals, people who are on a liquid diet. And then someone said, well, we could just tweak it, change the packaging, and now it's liquid nutrition on the go for moms, for athletes, etc., etc. So all they did was change the packing, and voila, kind of a new product, but not really. Because before because it was consumed in a hospital setting, it had a pop open lid. It was not resealable. So you had to just use it in the one go and you couldn't replenish it. So that's an example. So in this, you have to kind of think about, okay, so what is it that we want to do in terms of the products? And then you also want to think about, okay, who do we want to sell it to? So the book has all kinds of good examples that you might want to look into in terms of how you want to finagle your portfolio and when to harvest, when to hold, etc., etc., etc. And of course, the strategic planning is going to offer kind of a guiding philosophy for you. It's also going to help you to build supply chains within that, because if you decide you want to divest this one and keep this one, grow this one and hold this one, then you have to know, how is my supply chain going to work with this? And then, so as you think of your marketing strategy, you will see this diagram, figure 2.4. You really have to think about, at the core, how am I building profitable customer relationships? How am I segmenting my market to build profitable customer relationships? How am I positioning my product to build profitable customer relationships? How am I targeting certain markets in order to build profitable customer relationships? What kind of product do I need to build those relationships? What kind of pricing do I need to build those relationships? How am I going to advertise to build those relationships? Where am I going to sell my product? How am I going to source my product to build those relationships? For example, let's use that last one. Where am I going to sell? How am I going to source? So Whole Foods has a program where they can identify, for certain products that they sell, they can identify exactly where each component of that product was sourced. So like, let's say they're selling apple juice, they can tell you this particular bottle of juice came from this particular orchard, these rows, and maybe even the trees and the person that picked it. And for some of us, we're like, I don't care who picked it. I really don't care which tree. But for some people, they want to know which tree and they want to know which orchard and they want to know where that apple came from. And so they have segment because they are going after a market that cares about sustainability, that cares about how this was sourced, where it was sourced. The fact that they have a product like that, they sell it in a way and label it in a way and promote it and price it accordingly, that creates profitable relationships for them because they're attracting a particular segment. And then at the end of it, you have to think about how we're going to overall plan for this market, how we're going to implement, what kind of measures we have in place so we can control and measure, etc., etc. So we're going to talk about market segmentation in the upcoming chapters because this is a huge, everything about marketing is who's our target market. And before we can talk about target marketing, we have to talk about target market segmentation. And so we're going to talk about geographic, demographic, psychographic, and behavioral, and we will get into all of those. Then we have to decide, once we know which segments we could go after, what is the segment that we're going to finally choose? Because based on the segment that we choose, we have to position ourselves accordingly. And so, what is positioning? Positioning is the place the product occupies in the minds of the consumer. So, do you want to be seen as a high end product? Do you want to be seen as a low end product? Do you want to be seen as a dollar store? And you have to think everything, all of the four P's must make sense for how you decide to position, right? Because let's say I always give students the example. If you are positioning, you're a country club, you're not going to advertise yourself with a wet t-shirt competition. At least I hope not, because clearly that is not suitable to a country club, right? So the idea here is that you're going to choose product, place, price, and promotion based on how you want to position yourself. Think of it as if you're having an event. You're having a really high-end dinner and you bring red plastic cups and paper plates. It's not going to work. Okay. So your four P's must make sense for who your positioning is. And a lot of companies have really done a good job on that. Like TJ Maxx, for example. TJ Maxx, their positioning is discount. Now, but it is designer discount. So what they try to do is in their stores, they try to make you feel as if you're having a designer kind of shopping experience because ideally people still want to feel as if it's luxurious, even though it's discount. Ross, on the other hand, is really not trying to go that route. Ross knows that their positioning is downscale from TJ Maxx positioning, for example. So their stores will look different, their pricing will be different, and everything about their environment will look different. Okay? So we talked about the marketing mix, and then you have to think about as you are planning for this marketing mix, you always have to be constantly analyzing what are your measures. You have to be planning and think about who are your audiences. You have to do what we call GOSTM, goals, objectives, strategies, tactics, and measures. We're going to get into that later. You always have to have a budget, controls, etc., etc. And when you do your implementation, that's where your tactics come in. You have to have very specific tactics for the implementation stages, and you always have to have control. Now, what is control? Control are the measures. You see, years ago, marketers really were just spenders. So I would have a marketing company, I would have an advertising firm, and all I did was spend. Companies gave me money based on a budget, not necessarily based on how good a job I was doing, but based on how much money they think they should be spending on marketing. And if I am Pepsi, my marketing budget is going to be based on what Coca-Cola is doing and not necessarily on what I need to be doing and how much I need to be spending. That has completely changed in today's market. In today's market, people are thinking about return on investment. If I spend X, you better make sure I get Y. What am I getting for what I am spending? And that is the measurement piece of this whole equation. And it is critical if you're going to have a successful environment. If you're going to have a successful product, if you're going to have a successful service. Okay, so that was chapter 3. See you on, sorry, that was chapter 2. See you on chapter 3.